It hasn't told me it. Okay.
Now it's live. Welcome, everyone, to the first of what may end up being a series. Tonight is Intro to Labor, Socialism and Unions. My name is Kat Peatney, and I'm a member of Metro Atlanta DSA. Tonight with us, we have Eric Robertson, Brandon Buchanan, Alec Woodall, and Ashley Dixon. I'm going to let each of them take a few moments and introduce themselves. Eric, why don't you start?
Okay. My name's Eric Robertson. I spent my experience in the labor movement. I've been a member of a couple of unions, but the main one was the Teamsters Union. I got a job in 2000 at UPS and became a member of Teamsters Local 728, and then got real active in our local union, and then helped a group of workers organize and take power in their union, and then from work basically proceeded to work for the union, trying to turn it into an organization that was good for workers and stronger for 13 years. And now I work for an organization called Jobs with Justice, Atlanta Jobs with Justice.
Thank you, Eric. Brandon.
I thought y'all were going to kick me out of here. Hello, I'm Brandon Buchanan. I'm basically on the left because of labor. My grandmother was with the census workers federally. My dad was an airplane pilot, and that's just sort of where my values come from, was my political introduction to politics. And I, a little older, started getting into maybe activism to the left of the Democratic Party, ended up at MADSA. People like me for some reason. I don't know why. I ended up chair, helping just spread our values down here in the South. And so much of that comes from the labor movement and making those good connections. And so I'm glad to just be part of the panel, share what I know about our history down here in the South, so that everybody can just be on the same page. We can all move forward in a positive direction. So it's good to be here tonight, y'all.
Thank you, Brandon. Ashley.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Dixon, and I grew up in a working class household in rural Kansas. And when I got involved in labor, I first got introduced to it through a worker center in Nashville called Workers' Dignity. And I was volunteer coordinator there for several years. And then I got into union work, and I worked on organizing union campaigns, external organizing in Florida for a year. And then I came to Atlanta and did internal organizing or representing workers here for a year. And I currently work for SURGE, showing up for racial justice. I'm really passionate about organizing the South, and I'm really happy to be here with y'all tonight.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And last but certainly not least, Alan, who is actually one of the people who helped make sure we could get together tonight.
Hi, and I'm Alan. I only actually joined DSA recently this year, been on the left for a long time, but really joining DSA and meeting a lot of other lefties and socialists and communists was able to really drill into my head the idea that, hey, maybe this organized labor thing is it's not just like part of what we do. It's actually probably the most important part of what we do. And so I'm trying, as I've realized that, try to make that a more central just argument and thing that is topic of discussion. And so, that's why got this panel together, which was so easy thanks to all of the amazing labor organizers we have among our members in MADSA. So I'm excited to get it kicked off.
Great, thank you, Alan. So tonight we're going to have a conversation. Hopefully you find it educational, and with the activists that we have on the call, it may radicalize you. Consider this your disclaimer. We do not take account for any radicalization that may occur. So with that said, we have great leaders all providing different perspectives. First question for the night: what is a union? Eric, why don't you kick us off there?
Okay. So whenever in the labor movement, whenever we try to organize workers, we ask the question in our first meeting with workers. We ask them, what is a union? And you get a number of answers, but they generally get it kind of right. But I think for the best working definition that you can use sort of for everybody to have a common language is that it's a group of workers who've joined together to collectively bargain with their employer over wages and working conditions and terms of employment. But I think also there's a Marxist sort of understanding that unions are the basic organization of the working class. That basically they are the organizations that we're all workers should be incorporated into for the purpose of advancing their interests.
I think when we talk about what is a union, we basically have to start with what is work. And work is an environment where you are putting a lot of your time and your energy and your effort into something where you are not getting 100% of what you are putting in to a job environment coming out. And that's just like the nature of our economic system right now. And wage theft is basically the most common form of theft in the United States, more than anybody throwing rocks through windows or anybody lighting things on fire. It's your boss lighting your paycheck on fire in a million different ways, making you stay a little later, making you jump through hoops at your job. So this isn't just the paycheck that you take home. It's also like your working conditions. And anybody who's been on a job knows that there's an uneven relationship between you and your employer. And your employer is well aware that they have a lot of leverage over you. And in fact, that leverage is kind of what our economic system depends on. They know that if you don't take whatever abuse that boss gives you, you are putting yourself at a lot of danger in terms of your ability to pay rent, your ability to take care of your family, your ability to do this. So collective bargaining is basically your means of getting leverage back on that working condition, because no longer can your boss screw with you and then maybe remove you from a workplace. Instead, you are advocating with a group of people to make sure that not just the pay rate is something that makes sense, but also that the conditions on the job are ones that make sense. And when we talk about unions, when we talk about labor, this is not stuff that is just about putting together heavy cars on an assembly line in Detroit. This is when you're making a hamburger. This is when you're knitting. This is just literally when you're at a bank. It's anything that involves like you and your workplace and making sure that you have those basic protections. And that it can even be you being a tech worker or a coder or a game designer or a writer or any of that kind of stuff. And that is kind of what a union's for. It's what it does, and it's like the most effective and proven method that a regular person has to have like a level playing field with their employers to make a fair arrangement for everybody involved.
Thank you so much, Brandon. So you've talked a lot about the typical blue collar workers, but can you speak a little more, because are unions only limited for blue collar workers?
Oh, I mean, no. I was having one of my most fascinating conversations was I was talking in a bar with a guy from New Orleans who was a labor organizer and literally just went across the city doing that hard work of helping people set up unions. And he was like, the number one misconception, the number one thing that I have in my way is talking to people who are not in traditional blue collar jobs, people who work in retail, people who work in food service, people who work in tech. And these are the kind of jobs that like most people who are watching this are probably in right now. And they think they don't really think of working with their coworkers in collective bargaining and things like that. So not only is it not only for blue collar workers, I think the future for the labor movement is going to be expanding really heavily beyond just being a blue collar worker kind of deal.
Agreed. And I mean, I think one of the key things too, some of the largest unions are teachers. Teachers are white collar workers. No. I mean, they're not blue collar workers, they're white collar workers.
Yeah.
But honestly, I think that was a really great overview of the concept of unions in general. But just kind of want to direct the conversation a little more about our very own state of Georgia. Georgia is a right to work state. Does that mean we can't unionize?
Makes it hard. I mean, Eric, go ahead, or Alan.
No, hell no, it doesn't mean that.
Hell no.
Right to work is a tool of the bosses, the same white supremacist slave owners who have been running the Southern economy, since this country began, basically organized to get the right to implement right to work laws after the National Labor Relations Act was passed in the 1930s. They passed another act in the late 1946, I believe it was, called the Taft-Hartley Act, which enabled these states to negotiate to ban contracts by employers that force all the people who work at a given workplace to be in the union, that require it. And because prior to that, if you worked anywhere at a union shop, the contract would say that the employer would not employ anybody who wasn't a member of the union. And that was the power of sort of controlling and organizing of a workplace. And so when the right to work laws were passed, they were passed explicitly in the Southern segregationist former slave states, because the white the bosses used the racism of white workers to say, you don't want to be forced into a workplace where you have to be in an organization where you're equal to a black person. And so that was the whole impetus behind right to work. Initially was a tool of the segregationists weaponized to crush labor organizations, because in effect what that does is it allows an anti-union worker to continue to work at a workplace where workers are trying to, say, get a better contract, get raises and things like that, and they cannot they're not unified because there's a group of racist white workers over here who don't want to be in the union with the black workers. And as you can imagine, there were quite a few workplaces, and there are still quite a few workplaces across the South where I ran into it as a union representative. There were racist workers who were anti-union who wouldn't join the union because it meant they were going to be equal with the black workers that they worked with. So it's very, I've been asked by people who were in these northern states who are have been going right to work in the last 10 years. They asked me sort of what the impact of right to work was. And I would tell them, I said, there's no world in which right to work doesn't suck for working people, but you can do concrete things in the context of right to work that make it manageable and not something that determines the destiny of your organization or your union. And I've seen that happen over and over again, where workers have organized, won all kinds of gains in spite of being in a right to work state. Workers still can collectively organize and still kick the ass of the boss.
Thank you so much, Eric. And actually, that concept of intersectionality is something we're going to touch on a little bit later in our conversation. But kind of still thinking big picture, what kind of demands have unions successfully fought for? And if you could speak to your particular experiences, that would be great. Ashley, why don't you kick us off with this one?
Sure. Historically, obviously, unions have, they win anything from better working conditions to health insurance to pay raise. The reason why 5-day working week is at least somewhat the norm still is due to labor wins. Just things that I personally witnessed. For example, there was a distribution center that I represented in rural Georgia. And during the coronavirus pandemic, they actually won $3.13 an hour hazard pay. And they did this by making a petition and demanding it. And at the very beginning of the pandemic, they also demanded to shut down the entire plant and won, and were paid for their time off during that time. So yeah, there's a lot of possibilities.
I love that, Ashley. That's very current. Literally, COVID wasn't a thing until this year. So tells us just how real and important this is. Does anyone else want to share experiences? Alan, Eric, Brandon?
Yeah, on a broader level, unions have been responsible for organizing and getting things like Social Security and unemployment insurance, and creating the OSHA department. All these things were things that were brought about by the labor movement, using their, pushing and fighting in the streets sometimes. But, many of these were products of the movement, the movements that came out of the Great Depression. But those were, all those things that came out of there were things that the labor movement pushed for. It was not like it would magically happen, and none of these elected officials came into the sort of New Deal and Great Depression thinking that they were going to help working people in any way, shape, or form, but they were forced to do it by radicals and union people organizing in the streets and raising Cain. So, most of the things that people associate as positive government benefits are products of the American labor movement.
Yeah. And this is, I think it's worth stressing for people who are at home and they're thinking like, boy, all this sounds good, but it sounds really, really tough because we're going through a pandemic. We're going through hard times economically. And what I would say is the fact that we are going through hard times economically makes that kind of unity more important and not less important. And in fact, like in Asheville, their nurses union just joined NNU, and they spent millions of dollars in North Carolina trying to talk the nurses out of unionizing. And this was all during COVID, and they were going through these horrible, horrible working conditions. And the owners, who were HCA, they were HCA Healthcare. And if you're aware of them, they're like a huge, like, for-profit hospital deal. It was a very long campaign, and it was, if I recall correctly, about 2,000 nurses that joined NNU. And if you're familiar with the National Nurses Union, they've just been one of the most powerful organizing forces in terms of moving the ball forward on how we think about and how we deal with healthcare. I know I mentioned airlines earlier, but airline pilots are also getting a lot of wins this year. With JetBlue and the TWU, they had a big negotiation this year that they came to a conclusion on, and that is just during this pandemic. Like, job security is real hard. Like, how many people know somebody that lost their job like during the pandemic, and their boss wasn't like easier on them, didn't give them extra space, wasn't kinder to them, but was like rougher on them, was harder on them, made things harder. So in these essential type positions, labor organizing has been more successful, not less. Yeah.
Thank you, Brandon. That was like a mic drop. I feel like I'm getting educated tonight too.
I know what's up. Yeah.
Which I did not expect. So viewers out there, you're getting put on game tonight. So a big question I really have. So we've talked a lot about unions, and what does labor organizing actually look like? Like, how do you get to the demands and the results? So what does it actually look like? Who wants to lead?
Yeah, so I'll start off just by saying that, it starts with a conversation with your coworkers. So, just starting to feel out how your coworkers are feeling and try to get them to name issues that are frustrating them. So, you could go to a coworker and rant about the fact that you don't have health insurance and you're really upset about that, but maybe your coworker Sally doesn't care about health insurance and already has health insurance. So the key is just asking questions, what are you concerned about? What is your issue? And then, really listening to them and letting them speak about it, and then just asking some agitational questions around that. So once they name their issue, just say, wow, how long do you think you can continue to put up with that? And then there's actually a very specific type of conversation that you can have with them. And maybe I think we have a link that you guys can look over a worksheet and just sort of read up on that if you're interested. But also, it's important to remember that you don't need a union to start doing labor organizing. Even if you are not, if you don't have a union, if you come together, you can still make demands. If you get everyone on the same page, you can take action, you can do a petition. There are things that you can do. The Worker Center that I worked at in Nashville, actually, all the workers that they helped represent outside of the workplace were not unionized, and they would go through a very specific process of having meetings, of calling their employers and trying to put pressure on them, and then if all else failed, they would have a press conference outside of their workplace and list their demands, and they would win. So there are lots of ways to win, and you don't necessarily need a union, but a union will make it easier and give you more protection.
Thank you, Ashley. Anyone else have any thoughts? Because I think that was a really great answer, but I want to make sure all of you get your perspectives out.
Yeah, I think what Ashley was saying on the question of like there's this formal legal process through which you go through the National Labor Board process with the union sort of aligning with you, and you file for an election, and then you get basically the workers get hammered by the boss for about 40 days, usually maybe 20 now with the shortened election time. And then you have an election and everybody votes after being put through a meat grinder by your boss. That's one side, but and workers can counter organize against those that repressive atmosphere. And then when they do, they're better off. So, but the actual process of that NLRB election process can be quite rough if the workers are not prepared for that kind of treatment by the boss. But then there's also this other people looking for innovative ways to go around or outside of the NLRB process. Where it's basically using the leverage of the workers' activity with public support to try to get bosses to recognize the unions without forcing them through what is essentially a rigged election process. There's workers who organize what are called minority unions, where they don't necessarily even try to go for a majority recognition process with the boss, but like what Ashley was talking about, they organize and put pressure on the boss through the National Labor Relations Act. Section 7 of the National Labor Relations Act gives you the right to seek to take concerted activity with your coworkers to address their working conditions. So some people that's what some workers have done to great effect in some cases, without actually ever trying to get a contract. Like the Fight for 15 movement used that activity to put pressure on McDonald's and some other fast food companies, as well as the Walmart workers used a similar concept of not actually trying to get a union contract, but making demands on the company. And they were able to have been able to make some concessions from these companies through that activity, but ultimately it takes a tremendous amount of focus and attention by the unions, and there's those yet to be resolved. Everything still ongoing.
Thanks, Eric. Your dog sounds like he wants to be involved in this conversation.
Outside, the dog is outside. It's on the other side of the window. Okay.
Yeah. My dad. He passed away like literally a couple of months ago. And when I was a teenager, he would talk to me. I didn't know that he was talking to me about organizing at the time, but he was just talking to me about, like, when you're at your job, what do you do when you're at your job? And the thing that he always emphasized so much was listen to your coworkers. Like, don't go into your job and, I'm going to sit up here and do my job, and then I'm going to go back home and collect my paycheck. But listen to your coworkers and listen twice as much as you talk, and look for the things that they're having trouble with, and try to not just listen to like what they're saying, but also reflect on why they're feeling that way. And if you're doing that, you can really like dig into what are the core problems that y'all have in common as a group. And I never really thought about that as like, this is I'm having an organizing conversation. It wasn't until years later that these things that had just been instilled in me, I just started putting them into practice, and it just made me a better organizer or facilitator for other people. And I think that when we talk about labor organizing, it's just talk to your coworkers. How many people at your job actually do that, and reach out to your coworkers and like try to become like an active part of their life, instead of like just something where we're all doing a task together. Because if you've got similar problems and you've got similar complaints about it, you have an opportunity to like agitate those things and say, hey, doesn't it suck that you've got to do da-da-da-da-da? Well, such and such other person also feels the same way. And so just like that, all you're doing is having a complaint in common. And suddenly you have like the loose beginnings of a friendship and of a relationship and of trust for each other. And when I see those stories about JetBlue and the unionizing there, so much of it is really more than just collective power. It's really about the people that work there having trust for each other, because there's so much money that's spent on demoralizing people and messing with what they think their interests are, that it's hard to do it. It's hard to do it unless you all know each other and have a mutual trust and respect for each other. So obviously there's a lot of actual nuts and bolts that go into it, but I think as much as anything else, it's about listening to other people when they talk and having things in common and then trusting each other.
Wow, thank you so much, Brandon. I think that's actually a perfect segue into a question I think you all really need to answer, mostly for the viewers, people who may not be sold because they are not quite in touch with their humanity yet. But really, if you had to try to sell the dream, so to speak, why should socialists care about organized labor and unions? Brandon, do you mind kicking us off with that?
Yeah, because socialism is all about improving the material conditions for people's regular life and taking your regular life job experience and kind of transmuting that into politics. And unions are the place in American life where the business world, the work world is political, because there is there's a self-governance, there's a unity. And so I think that if you're a socialist, then you're thinking about the economy. It's how the economy works, and it's forming a cooperative economy. There aren't many economies more cooperative than a union. And that is just what it's all about. I don't know what else to add there.
Yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and weigh in on this topic. Like I said before, I think socialists should care about organized labor and unions, because whatever brought you into socialism or the left, whether it's Green New Deal, Medicare for all, defund the police, whatever it is, you name it, basically you're not getting it done without labor, without some sort of coalition with and pressure from organized labor, whether that's in the traditional unions or in new organizing. That's just where we have the levers to get it done. That's where we can really, really hit them back, and where organization can beat money. And that's one of the only places where that's true. So that's why I think socialists should care about organizing labor.
And also
issues.
And also, I'll just quickly add, as a part two, because you did mention this, whatever your policy is, if you are trying to build human beings together in a task, the actual steps are the same. My family was a union family. I haven't done any union leading, but I've done organizing around other campaigns. And the lessons that I learned from there, are the same for any political issue, whether it's the climate. You listen to people talk about it. What is your problem with the climate right now? Why do you think that things are that way? What do you think that we can do about it? I know other people who are as mad about this situation as you are. Let me get you in touch with them. Here are the things that we can do. And that basic framework is the framework for climate organizing. It's the framework for police defunding. It's the framework for just name a topic that we're doing, whether it's being against the war in the military industrial complex. Just anything that we do has that same core series of steps. So if you're good at that, you're good at everything. And people who are veterans of unions know those same steps when it comes to anything else.
Yeah.
Great.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I think it seems kind of just a duh question, because socialists think that working people should run the society, and unions are the most basic organization of the working class that is likely to turn into bringing something that can bring our class into motion, so that we can take power in the society. And so, but in basic terms, we should go where the workers are, and the workers are the most advanced workers in this country and in this economy and in the society, and in most societies are in unions. That's not true in every industry because the unions have not continued to organize and grow. So there are entire industries now that have no unions in them that have developed. And there are industries also where unions do not control enough of the wage scale or the direction of that industry to effectively say that they're influencing it, because they represent such a small number of workers, and the wage scale is, like it's like one company is in an island of low wage employers and things like that.
Thank you. Eric, I was actually going to ask you, can you talk a little about the law around public school teachers and their right to unionize? It's actually a question we've had from one of our viewers. Yeah, and I really should have that like on a cue card or something for like what is the code section, because I've had to say this like a bunch of times in my time as a labor organizer and activist and all that, learning about this. But yeah, so fundamentally based in Georgia, public sector workers, and in this case teachers who are public sector, do not have the right to collectively bargain, meaning they do not have the right to go through the process of the National Labor Relations Act or an alternate process that the state might set up to get a union. So like basically the National Labor Relations Act only covers workers in the private sector. And in states like Georgia, they don't have a law that says workers that aren't in the private sector have any rights, basically, or very few rights. And they certainly don't have the right to collectively bargain or strike. And that's actually, so you can be put in. It's a misdemeanor in Georgia to go out on strike. If you're a public sector worker. And so basically, but workers still have organized. I mean, so the American Federation of Teachers and the Georgia Education Association, and there's other teachers associations that try to do a form of collective organization that is not collective bargaining, where they basically organize, join an organization, and then do things to try to improve their working conditions through active participation in their governments and civic engagement and those types of things. Does that answer the question? Yes, in fact, I've seen her post say thank you for answering her question.
That's very thorough.
So thank you, Eric. Just another question that came through too was, are AFL-CIO unions still valid, or is it better to form your own union?
I don't. Go ahead.
Really good, but I think
I put the blabbermouth. I mean, because but yes, I have thoughts on this. So
go ahead, Eric. Take it away. Educate us.
Yeah,
I think Ashley can speak a little more to like what I wanted to talk about next, which is how you organize without a union. But if you can answer, is it better to form your own union, or are AFL-CIO unions still valid? Because that's pretty much a factual question, and I personally haven't done research.
Brandon, we can see you laughing over there. You know that, right?
Well, those are very complicated relationships over there. That's the reason why.
Yes, right. Yes, no. I actually think, and this is honest, and Brandon's laughing at this because this is probably the thing he was wondering what I was going to say. I do believe that the unity of the labor movement is the priority in general. So, if possible, whenever possible, and even when it's probably not possible, when you organize, you should try to organize in a union that's affiliated to the AFL-CIO where they exist. Now, there are states where collective bargaining and things like that don't exist. So, like in one of the unions organized in North Carolina, again, organized without collective bargaining rights, is affiliated to the United Electrical Workers, which is a really incredibly awesome union that is independent of the AFL-CIO. So I don't want to say that it's not right to organize in an independent union. I just think it, in many cases, and in some cases not, it does cause hardship because that union is not protected from being what they call raided by other unions in the AFL-CIO and things like that. But
so, Eric, would you say there's a wrong way and a right way, or there is no wrong way?
I think workers organizing to get power at work and change their working conditions is the right way. That's what I care about. I don't give a shit who you pay dues to. I don't care if you pay dues. Just organize, build power, get some justice, and kick ass. That's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah,
Get that on a t-shirt.
That's actually that'll at least be a fire tweet, bare minimum. Yeah, the AFL-CIO has issues, but let me tell you, every human organization has issues,
That's right.
both internally and in terms of like their approach to gaining power. Is it too conservative? Is it too aggressive? Is it this or that? But I think the AFL-CIO is still a valid organization that has a lot to contribute to the movement as a whole. Sometimes they need to be pressured to do the right thing, but like literally name an organization that does not need to be pressured to do the right thing. That's every group. So yeah, that's just my thought. Yes, the AFL-CIO is still valid. And if you need to work with them, just call them, get their guidance. Especially, look, if you're asking whether they're valid, that means that you should call them and do a little work with them and find out for yourself.
Ooh, smoke.
Brandon. So, and Ashley, this might be a great question for you. How do you organize at work without a union?
Sure. Yeah. So,
Is it legal?
Sorry, what'd you say?
Is it legal? First of all.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are always things that you can do that's protected. Anytime two workers or more come together, and they can make demands. Now, like obviously, you can get fired, and no one can stop that. But the idea is that if you get the majority of your coworkers on board, are they really going to fire all of you? So that's something to consider. And there's been many cases where workers have, especially during the coronavirus pandemic, where workers shut things down and said, we're not taking these working conditions, and did walkouts, did things, and made demands and made it happen. There's also, a lot of, just to give you some ideas, the Worker Center in Nashville, I already gave an example of as organizing without a union. There's not a Worker Center in Atlanta. However, there is something called the Southern Workers Assembly. I don't know if you're all connected to them, but I would recommend looking them up. They are forming workers' assemblies across the South and basically just connecting workers and working on like co-organizing projects together and making demands of their workplaces and showing up for each other. So there's a spirit of community around it. Also during the pandemic, I started up something called the Community Union Organizers Group, and it went on for a few months. And there was a mixture of workers that were unionized and a mixture of workers that were not unionized. And we all got together on Zoom, and people just talked about, the problems they were having in their workplace. And they came up with, they walked each other through, like, how would we deal with the situation? Like, what's the first step? Okay, grabbing one of your coworkers and bringing her to the call next week. Maybe it's something as small as that. And then slowly you progress. And then maybe, a group of 5 workers confront their supervisor. And then you just take escalating steps. And we just kept meeting every week, and we kept encouraging each other, giving each other ideas, bouncing ideas off of each other. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to do it. There's a lot of ways to be creative and work outside the system. And in some ways, and I love unions, I'm very pro-union, but also organizing outside of a union can give you the ability to be, more militant in your organizing. Because a lot of times when you have a union contract, there's a no strike clause. There are certain things that you can't do. Whereas if you don't have a union, there's nothing to prohibit all of you from just walking out together and saying, this is it, like, meet our demands or we're out of here. So yes, you can organize without a union.
Thank you, Ashley. And so I don't know if our viewers are feeling the same way I'm feeling, but the way that all of you so far have been talking, you make it all sound so easy. But of course, it's probably not. So how do you keep momentum going in the workplace, or how do you avoid the burnout or losing hope, especially when these corporations are, cranking down? Because, it's a balance of power. Who wants to speak to that?
Hell yeah.
And if I'm wrong and it is easy, please, correct me. We don't want anyone getting.
You know what? It's the saddest part about the reality of the American workplace is that it requires you to be brave to organize. That is absolutely a tragedy. It should not require you to be brave to organize to get a union. You should be able to get one without any kind of drama or pressure or any of that. any bullshit or anything from your boss, and that is not the case. You go through hell if you go through traditional organizing. So yes, organizing is not easy, but the people who do it are brave, and they've made a collective decision with their coworkers that they are going to get a change at work. And I've seen it happen over and over again. I've never done it myself, but I've seen workers themselves over and over again back off of a boss, push a boss back because they counter organize. The boss comes in with an anti-union meeting and they just go crazy and yell at the boss and things like that. Because they did it together, the boss just backs off, but I've also seen cases where workers are fired and that those workers continue to fight and achieve their goals. And then I've also seen workers, wage campaigns, people be terminated, people lose their jobs, just all the bad stuff happens. So it's not easy, but the bravery is for the workers that I don't know. I mean, I've seen workers try multiple times to organize companies, gone through multiple campaigns, seen them try to organize, and they just wait until they get enough of the people on their side to be able to get it done. But I've also seen, I've seen workers just be too scared to try over and over again, more times than not. Be scared, too afraid to take on the boss and get a union, even though it is absolutely the case that they will get a bigger raise than they did at a minimum. They'll get a bigger raise than they did from their boss. So, but what they would have to go through is just too much.
I have nothing to add. That was a 10 out of 10. That was a swish of an answer. I really love that.
I mean, definitely a 10 out of 10, but do you have any strategies to kind of maybe avoid the burnout, avoid, getting defeated and demoralized when, you're constantly being told no, or you're constantly being threatened? I mean, especially if deep down you don't want to just quit, what would you recommend?
What would you tell workers in meetings? I just want to tell you this is what we tell workers in meetings when we're organizing them. They ask that exact same damn question. How do we make it happen? What do we do? We want this. So we say, can you promise us that we're going to get a raise? Can you promise us nobody's going to get fired? Can you promise us everything's going to get better? And what we respond to them is, no, we cannot promise you anything. What we can tell you is that if you don't have a union, this company can do anything it wants to you that is not a violation of federal law.
I would also maybe just add, I would just add also that I think a key in avoiding burnout is for workers to really take ownership of their union and see themselves as the union. So the workers are the union, and a lot of times I think it's encouraged on both. Well, the workers view it this way, and it's encouraged sometimes from the union to see the union as like the representative. And so workers are asking, well, what's possible, and asking all the questions of the union representative. But actually, the workers have the power, and they are the union, and they make the decision. So if they want to make something happen, they can do it. And so they just have to remember that and take ownership of it, create their own meeting spaces, have their own meetings, set up their own, community support structure. I would say that, that's the key to avoiding burnout and also making big wins.
I'll just add, like, the avoiding burnout and avoiding losing hope. Like, Kat, you're sitting here moderating and telling us when we've done enough, but you've done a lot of organizing yourself, and sometimes you can't get everybody on board for what you want to do. But what I've seen in my own experience is that kind of fear, like that kind of nervousness, really only applies for when you are working up the courage to actually talk to other people and speak on these issues. Because the first time that somebody really gets it, and it's not after you don't have to talk to like 10 people to find somebody who gets it on any of these issues. If you talk to like 5 people, 6 people, you'll find somebody who gets it, and they care so much about this, and maybe they haven't always heard it before, and the idea that they can really do it fires them up so much that they're willing to run through a damn wall for you, and run a damn wall for like the campaign that you're working on. And when you have that, then burnout doesn't happen. like losing hope doesn't happen because there's somebody on your left that cares about it like you care about it, and there's somebody on your right that cares about it like you care about it. So when you are burned out, you just feel burned out. But what happens is that person that you brought in on your left is advancing and moving the cause forward, and that person that's on your right is advancing and moving the cause forward. I've had times in my personal life that I just couldn't get the work done, couldn't function, and I've just been very fortunate that other people have, in those moments, have picked it up and pushed forward on my behalf. So for this question, don't feel like you're allowed to burn out. You're allowed to lose hope, but if you do the work, you will inspire many other people, and that's like what we're here to do.
Man, thank you guys. Those are really great responses. And I mean, this panel is so dope. You see how everyone built on each other's responses? That's labor organizing.
Yeah, one more thing to put on top of it. I don't have anything better to say than anybody else said, but specifically, I know there's a lot of DSA, a lot of Metro Atlanta DSA people on this call. We have a working group every week that meets Tuesdays at 7, and one of the best ways of avoiding burnout is meeting with your other comrades and bitching about work and hearing about organizing that's going on. It's really the best cure there is, I promise. All right, that's it.
No, I appreciate the plug. Shameless but necessary. So remember, every Tuesday, the MADSA Labor Working Group meets, and so you get to have Alan, show yourself in the spotlight again.
Oh, yeah.
Help guide you as you go through talk about your work struggles with different comrades, and then talk about how we can make the work life so much better. So thank you for that plug, Alan. And just, looking at the time, and I know there's a few other topics we want to talk about, but Brandon touched a little on this earlier. And can you all just kind of elaborate on how organized labor fits into other fights for justice, like police brutality, housing rights?
No, can I actually briefly quick touch on this? Because I don't want to, maybe it's too soon or too late, but I just so much want to talk about the washerwomen, because one of the first major unions in Atlanta was a Black women's union. And if you remember, like back in the early 1900s, late 1800s, laundry was like the hardest domestic task, and there weren't laundry machines yet. So, I mean, if you had dirty clothes, you had to go and like manually like make hot water and make your own soap and make lye and all the other stuff to like wash. And it was like some of the most brutal work that a domestic person could do. And if you were a Black person, like that was one of the only things that you were getting hired for. And Black women made like half of the workforce in Atlanta specifically. And they put together, despite lots of racism and lots of misinformation, formed a union. And those folks were only getting paid like $3 or $4 a month. They were getting like paid terrible wages. And there was so much agitation that the government would only allow them to unionize if they gave half of their wages back to the state, if I recall that story correctly. And they took it because having self-determination was so critical for their ability to build their own communities and to spend with each other and give to each other. So as we are doing this kind of work, so much of the work that we need to do requires a certain amount of economic self-sufficiency and codependency, because, when we talk about housing rights, there's economic leverage that comes into it from like landlords, right? And when we talk about police brutality, there's economic leverage that comes in through not just like police departments, but I always talk about developers, because I feel like land developers and gentrification are like at the core of police brutality and are the unspoken economic issue behind that kind of thing. All of those things have like economic leverage is core to it. So the more economic leverage that we have that allows us to rely on each other and survive, the more that we can advance like racial justice, the more that we can advance women's rights, the more that we can advance housing, the more that we can reimagine, rethink the policing system. So all of that stuff is important, and organized labor is not everything. Obviously, like there are plenty of regressive tendencies in labor unions. We could do a whole different video on that, but this is a big, vital building block to building that kind of economic interdependence that we can use for political purposes.
Thank you, Brandon. Ashley, do you want to chime in a little more on the women's piece? Because I think that, and I mean, don't feel like you're limited to women's, but I think Brandon brought up a very good point, just how much of the labor movement was rooted in women. So,
yeah, well, just in general, I mean, organized people means organized power, and so especially, you know, I mean, women had to fight really hard to even be allowed to be union members, and now we do have a pretty equally distributed, you know, gender equal like number of union members, but at the same time the leadership is still lacking. So there's still a struggle there. But also, you know, just in general, I'm a really strong proponent of whole worker organizing and thinking about not just what's happening in the workplace, but also, you know, what is happening in people's communities. And having this kind of organizational structure in the workplace allows people to come together and talk about what's actually going on in their community. And that's, you know, that's the spark of something that could create a movement to change the conditions in the community. So just having that infrastructure there, and then, you know, calling, you know, other people down the street who are at a different workplace but are represented by the same union, and, you know, getting everyone on board. And everyone, you know, goes to the city council meeting demanding this change together because it's affecting all the workers, and they realize that in their union meetings and their conversations together. So that's, I think that's one way that it really fits in for other fights for justice.
Eric, give us your thoughts, please.
Yeah. I think that there's, you know, if you look at American history, the labor movement played a key role in the sort of progressive advance forward of American society in two key moments. One being the 1930s and during the New Deal, the fight during the New Deal, in which you saw hundreds of thousands, I'll say, I don't know the exact numbers, of Black workers in the U.S. South and be able to organize in steel mills and in just all kinds of workplaces all across the U.S. South, and that became a proxy fight around segregation and white supremacy in the South, and then, you know, forward again into during the 50s and 60s in the civil rights movement with Dr. King. The labor movement played an outsized role in support and financing and putting actual people, putting boots on the ground for the civil rights movement, supporting Dr. King in Mississippi, a Teamster, the wife of a Teamster business agent from Detroit, Viola Liozzo, was assassinated in Alabama, driving civil rights workers back from Selma. And that was just it. So, and then now come, you know, into this the uprising that has happened now around police killings and Black Lives Matter. The reaction of the labor movement has actually been one of the bright spots. It was an early bright spot, sort of prior to all the Amazon and everybody slapping Black Lives Matter on everything. I mean, the labor movement was passing resolutions and actually did workplace activities in support of Black Lives Matter. And that's just unprecedented level of activity in the labor movement in terms of educating its members around questions of racial justice. And that's happening right now. So that's very, I think, and then what Ashley was saying around the questions of women's roles in the labor movement has been huge advances made in all 30% of the Teamsters union I was in the longest are women. And that is not because of benevolence on the part of either the employers or the union. That's a product of women organizing and fighting for their right to be able to go to work in workplaces wherever the hell they want to work. And so you now have lots more women driving package cars at UPS and trucks for freight companies because of those. But also you have more women now than ever that are rising up as leaders of the labor movement, becoming presidents of locals, leading departments within the union and things like that. So labor has had a contradictory relationship, but it's been a terrain of struggle at the same time that it's supporting or opposing struggles within societies as a whole. There's been struggles within labor around these questions for decades.
So, Eric, I think that's a perfect segue into a question that resonates pretty closely with me. I am pro defunding the police, refunding communities. Dark ATL, everyone. Check out their Twitter, Instagram. Shameless plug. So with that said, we've talked about police brutality. We've talked about racial justice. How do police unions fit into the labor movement?
Well,
They're not fucking unions.
Yeah, I mean,
they're right-wing cabals. They're fascist gangs. They're not fucking unions.
the fact that nobody's ever tried to bust no overlord has tried to bust the police union, it's like a good sign that politically they're not aligned with the rest of labor. And you've literally never, ever, ever, ever seen a police union support any other labor group.
And there are active campaigns in some of the larger unions. I know SEIU has an active campaign right now where people are, employees are saying, we want to disband the police we represent. We don't want to represent them anymore. So we're hoping that happens.
All they have to do is undo the merger. Yeah. They merged with a cop union. So they just undo the merger with the cop union and it'd be a done deal. Their affiliate NAGE, the National Association of Government Employees within SEIU, is the affiliate that has the cop union in it. The Teamsters have quite a few cops in the union as well.
So just so we're all clear, police union is a misnomer.
I mean, they should. There are. I will say this: that there are some unions that should be destroyed, and that's one of them. You know, like that. I mean, that's. They're not. There were white supremacist unions back in the day. There were bosses unions back in the day. They're a bosses union, so like they are not. They're you know, yeah, they should be disbanded and pretty much destroyed.
Thank you.
To the winds. Yeah.
So I actually think that kind of ties into a really big question, right? Because, you know, as anyone who's actually been involved in I call it civic engagement, you know that you can, push for wins, but the way to really cement the wins are through legislation. So can we talk about the role of unions in electoral work?
Yep.
I'm sure,
Yeah, I mean, unions, they show up. Well, I mean, if you ever gone to a North Georgia Labor Council meeting, they phone bank. They take call because they're already working together, so they already talk to each other, and they're closer maybe to each other than you just going on a street corner and holding up a sign and getting some regular schmegglers. The union folks, they're just historically people that all know each other, so that when the message gets out, everybody's got it really quickly, and the ability to organize really quickly is obviously important for elections, but maybe just as importantly, they're financially invested in politics, which is, as a workplace, which is much more than the average person, and that has a big effect. And when it comes to phone banking or making calls or knocking doors or doing pamphlets or events, just labor is always consistently doing, because they've done it for a long time and they've trained other people to do it, and they're incredibly effective. And that's why anytime somebody runs for office, even if they're in a red state, generally labor is one of the first places that they go to. And if you're on the left and you're looking into a candidate and you're like, what are their endorsements? 9 times out of 10, labor is the first one that you look for. Unions have been critical to electoral work since the Democratic Party and forward, just historically.
Yeah, I think there's a certain mystification that goes for the progressive non-union folks who watch labor and how it relates to politics. It can be kind of confusing sometimes, because labor doesn't always support the person with the best politics. Labor doesn't always support the same people that the people on the left support in every race. And I mean, that's because labor is thinking about its interests in a very pragmatic sense in many cases. And when it has an opportunity to think more strategically, and some unions do, they make better decisions. But many unions are sort of not very strategic about what they think or whatever. So they just go for the sort of the thing, the surest bet of somebody who's going to be their friend. Right. And there are really good unions out there like Unite Here, who, and other unions, to greater and lesser degrees, who, pressure employers and use their electoral strategy singularly to deal with their employers and things like that, and really only caring about electoral politics insofar as it advances the interests of their members. And sometimes that puts you in a good place, and sometimes that puts you in a bad place when it relates to the left. When you're the building trades and you want more construction projects, you want to keep Plant Vogel open while the rest of the left wants to shut it down. That is that's sort of that probably gets at the crux of it right there, that unions are workers' organizations. They are not progressive organizations. And so if the industry they represent is sort of like the tobacco workers are not progressive folks, I'll just tell you, in terms of the union. And the machinist union loves the military industrial complex, and the Teamsters supported the pipeline as well as the building trades. And those were all pragmatic decisions that they made. Oh, and unions like Unite Here will support casinos being built when some other progressive organizations might oppose it.
Sure.
So anyway, so those things are mystifying sometimes to people who are not thinking along those lines, and it sometimes it helps to process it a little bit if you just understand that unions are operating from what is in their members' interests, not in what is in the best interests of the left.
And we saw that this year with some of the stuff with the casino workers and their hesitance to take certain actions. They, the unions got to protect itself, number one. And because we're in a time period where unions have been taking just incredible blows from not just government, but from the billionaire class in terms of propaganda and advertising and stuff like that, they can't always move in doctrinaire ways according to the lefty playbook. But again, that's part of, you've got to listen twice as much as you talk and hear where people are coming from and figure out ways to move their interests in your direction. And that's just how you get along with another human being or another group of human beings.
And also, just another reminder that members have the power. So, that's one thing that membership can do is basically push their union, their representatives, their leaders in the direction that they want to go, push them to support candidates that are for the working people. And so, membership can really influence that and really has power over that, even if sometimes they aren't aware of it.
Yeah, I mean, really good points. And I personally just can't emphasize enough, right, that all unions are not progressive. And I think that's a key point that we hopefully are all trying to drive home on part of it, because, this is why the series is socialism and unions, right? Because you can't just be unions as a standalone, can't be socialism as a standalone. And so I want to get to a question that we had from our audience earlier before we kind of wrap up. Can we speak about organizing in private universities in Georgia? Eric, you are our resident answer the question. And of course, everyone else can fill in.
I mean, I think that there's nothing, as far as I know, United Campus Workers will organize private campus university workers, but I mean, people need to build campaigns. I mean, they should message us and tell us if I'm lying about that. But I believe that the United Campus Workers would if workers were trying to organize on or the American Federation of Teachers has been willing to, in the past, help workers organize on campuses. So you just basically, if you wanted to organize on a private university and you have the thing that workers got to understand when they call a union or they want to organize with a union is the union is not going to come in and do the campaign for you. So if you are not talking to your workers, to your coworkers, that is what they're going to tell you to do when you call them. So go ahead and get that out of the way and talk to your coworkers and try to, in a smart way, without getting yourself fired, figure out if you have some number of your coworkers who are willing to support organizing, because that is what they're going to tell you to do when you call them.
Thank you so much, Eric, for taking that question. And so I kind of just want to give us a few moments to wrap up. I want to be cognizant of everybody's time and just reiterate that this is the first of a series of panels that we'll be doing. So we're not here to answer every single question or thought or perspective about unions, but we really hope that tonight has been able to get the conversation and minds flowing. So with that, Alan, do you have any final thoughts you want to share with the group?
I don't have anything particularly poignant, but I hope this was useful for people. And anybody who wants to contact me, labor@madsa.ga is the best way to reach me if you're not already at me on Slack. And just, yeah, let me know what you liked or didn't like and what you would want to see more of from us. Thanks, everyone.
Ashley?
Yeah.
Any final thoughts?
I don't have too much to add, but just, I hope you all will continue organizing or start it up, even if it seems daunting. Reach out to one of us. I'm sure we would be happy to answer some questions. And also check labor notes. It's just an infinite resource that would be really good for you in thinking about organizing. Labor notes, and then also look into the Southern Workers Assembly.
Thank you so much, Ashley. So Eric.
Okay, two things. One, read this book right here.
Hey.
It actually is available now on PDF. If you Google it, it used to cost $1 gazillion, and I bought it back when it costed $1 gazillion. But you can now get it for free if you just look for it on. I can help you get it if you email me eric4themanning@gmail.com. If you can't find it, I'll find it for you. Also, read Jane McAlevy's book, No Shortcuts. Read that book too, because these are both awesome books. But this one is about Operation Dixie, where the AFLCIO tried to organize the South back in the 50s, and it got its, or late 40s, got its butt kicked, by the way. So check it out.
Eric coming through with the literature recommendations. Thank you, Eric. And so Brandon, last of course but not least.
I don't have any books within arm's length. Like the books are like right out of my range here, which is disturbing.
Okay.
But
Stacks, man, stacks.
I love that. First of all, Ashley, one of the best folks that I know around here. Just a font of information, and when she said read labor notes, she beat me to it. Labornotes.org is the website, and I believe that if you go to tinyurl.com/labor panel, it'll take you to just having an organizing conversation, which is step 0 when it comes to doing anything political, and when it comes to doing anything that's not even political in the real world, but it's just posting and talking to people online. It's just like a very good playbook for relating to others and getting them to do what we need to do in order to, take back society and push things in a positive direction in the next 4 years, the next 8 years, the next 12 years. So I'm real happy that people are on here. And I also think people should watch Mattawan, the movie. It's a really good movie about labor in West Virginia. There's just tons of great labor themed films that aren't just about like the struggles of labor, but also do a little education in a basic way. So it's super rad, and that is all that I have to say.
Thank you so much, Brandon. Eric, I want to ask you too if you have movie recommendations, but before we started the broadcast, you showed us a sign of history. You want to share it with everybody?
Yeah.
Eric is a real deal. Everyone on this panel is a real deal.
So a friend of mine, this is sort of this is a pretty sad symbol, but a friend of mine got this at an estate sale. It's a picket sign from the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Union that was basically smashed by Ronald Reagan in 1981. He fired the entire union, decertified and fired the entire union when they went on strike. And it was basically seen as the beginning of the backslide of the American labor movement. And yeah, so that enough about that. So yes, watch the Salt of the Earth. Matewan, which Brandon said, and Harlan County, USA, and 10,000 Black Men Named George.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And just, as we sign off and say goodnight, just make sure you remember organized people need organized power.
Hey, this is good. This is great. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, and you can share this with your
Thank
friends
you.
when you're done. It's rad. Pass it around.
Share.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for coming. We'll try to put some movie and book recommendations on the event thread, so look out for that.
Oh, that's a really good idea. That's a
9
good
to
idea.
5. We should put 9 to 5 on there too.
Oh, you people can't let go of Dolly Parton.
You
like
will
that's
never
the-
let go of Dottie. You better let you. I will fuck you up.
all I'm
Sorry
saying
to
is-
bother you.
Oh God, sorry to bother you is literally just about labor organizing. That's a really great pick. I'm just saying that all of us on the left, we can like 2 songs. We can find a second one if we can all agree on it.
I'm talking about the movie.
Oh, I thought you were just whenever people are talking about music.
He's in the movie too, asshole.
All right.
Do a movie night.
All right, Eric's getting heated. We're gonna stop before the. Come on.
All right, somebody hit that button. Let's get out of here.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
For joining us.
Thank you.